Every morning, like clockwork, he walked down the quiet streets of the small town. He wore an old, oversized military coat that dragged behind him, torn at the edges and faded by time. On his head sat a weather-beaten cap, its patch so worn you could barely tell it once held a military insignia. His cane, carved from dark wood, clicked with each step. The kids on their bikes whispered about him. Adults gave polite nods, then smirked behind his back. They called him names the Ghost, Major Make-Believe, Sergeant Scarecrow. No one knew his real name, and no one cared enough to ask. To them, he was just an old man playing soldier, dressing up like a forgotten war hero. Some even said he wore that coat to get free coffee from the diner across the street. But he never asked for anything. He just came, sat at the park bench across from the flagpole, and watched the town wake up. Then, before noon, he'd vanish again, slipping behind the rows of old houses near the edge of town. One day 2 teens followed him, curious. They watched him walk into an abandoned lot filled with broken bricks and weeds. In the corner stood a half-collapsed shed with no door and no windows. That's where he went. That was his home. The teens laughed and ran off. The next morning, they told everyone at school. Soon, the story spread that crazy old vet lives in a shed. Now, the jokes were louder. Some people even started leaving plastic toy soldiers on the park bench before he arrived, mocking him. But still, every morning he came, still wearing that coat, still carrying that cane, still nodding quietly at the flag, then sitting in silence. People didn't notice the way he stood still during the national anthem that played from the courthouse speaker every Friday. They didn't see the tears that formed in his eyes when a young boy saluted the flag. They didn't see the way his hand trembled when he reached into his coat pocket and held something small, something that never left his side. One cloudy morning, the town woke to something unusual. A low hum echoed across the sky. Then came the sharp thump-thump of blades slicing through the air. A military helicopter, large and unmistakable, appeared over the town square. People stopped, eyes turned upward, phones came out. The chopper circled once, then lowered slowly toward the open field behind the park, the same park where the old man sat each morning. He was there now, standing. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Soldiers, dressed in clean uniforms, stepped out as the helicopter touched down. One of them walked forward, looking directly at the man. He saluted. And the old man, with slow dignity, turned the salute, his trembling hand perfectly steady for that single, powerful moment. The crowd around the park was silent. All the laughter, all the jokes, all the smirks gone. 'Cause in that moment they finally realized he wasn't pretending. He was someone, but who? And why had a military helicopter come just for him? For a long moment no one moved. The helicopter's blades slowed, but the buzz in the air remained. The dust that kicked up around the field began to settle, and everyone's eyes were fixed on the strange scene unfolding in front of them. The old man, once a joke, a mystery, a morning routine, was now the center of attention. But it wasn't just the townspeople staring. The uniformed men beside the helicopter didn't look confused or casual. They stood tall, their boots together, backs straight. One of them, clearly in command, took a few steps forward. He spoke loud enough for the crowd to hear. Sergeant Raymond Ellis. "It's an honor to stand in your presence." Gasps spread through the gathering like a ripple in still water. "Sergeant," someone whispered. "He's a real soldier?" The teens who had left toy soldiers on his bench backed away in shame. The barista, who'd once giggled while serving him coffee, lowered her head. Everyone else stood frozen, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Raymond Ellis didn't speak. He simply returned the salute again. Slower this time, his eyes wet but proud. "Sir," the officer continued, "we've come with orders. You are to be escorted to Arlington. The president has approved your transport personally." Arlington. The name carried weight, even among those who didn't know much about the military. Arlington National Cemetery wasn't just any place, it was sacred ground, reserved for the nation's greatest heroes. But why was he going there? Some thought he might have been invited to a ceremony. Others wondered if he had saved someone important. A few even guessed he was being honored after years of being forgotten. But no one could answer one burning question. Who was Sergeant Raymond Ellis? Really? The officer turned to the crowd. Many of you may not know, but this man served in a classified operation over 50 years ago. His file was sealed. He was presumed dead. That hit harder than expected. Presumed dead? How could someone live in the same town for years, and no one know who he really was? The officer went on. He was behind enemy lines for 9 months. He carried one wounded soldier on his back for 3 days through hostile territory. He destroyed enemy communications with his bare hands. And he refused evacuation until every last man in his unit was safe. The crowd stood in stunned silence. He was awarded the Silver Star and the Distinguished Service Cross, but he never accepted them. He disappeared shortly after the war. We only tracked him down recently through satellite imagery, when we noticed a flag raised behind an abandoned lot in this very town. The crowd began to turn slowly, quietly toward the man they had mocked for years. That coat wasn't a costume. The cane wasn't a gimmick. That silence wasn't shame. It was dignity. And suddenly, it all made sense. The way he stood during the anthem, the way he watched the flag, the quiet tears, the distant eyes, the unseen pain. All those years he had been watching them, living among them. A man who had once been strong enough to carry another to safety, through war now quietly carried his own pain, and they had all missed it. The officer stepped aside. One of the soldiers offered Sergeant Ellis a hand to assist him toward the chopper. But Ellis gently refused. He took one step forward, then another. His cane hit the ground with the same rhythm as always, but this time it echoed with honor. He reached into his coat and pulled out something smaller, folded aged photograph. He handed it to the soldier. The soldier nodded, looked at it, then handed it back. "We'll make sure they're there, sir." The crowd leaned in. Who was in that photo? Family? Fallen comrades? A promise kept? They didn't know yet. But one thing was now certain. It's a town that mocked a man for the way he looked. It just saluted a legend. As Sergeant Raymond Ellis took slow steps toward the waiting helicopter, the crowd parted like waves around a ship. The people who once mocked him now stood aside, silent and wide-eyed, unsure whether to apologize or salute, but he didn't look at them. His eyes stayed forward, fixed on something far beyond the town, beyond the moment, beyond even the field. He was walking toward his past. When he reached the chopper, a young soldier stepped down to meet him. "Sir, may I take your cane?" Raymond paused. Then after a long breath, he handed it over. Without the cane, he stood straighter than anyone expected, shoulders squared, chin lifted. He climbed into the helicopter on his own, slowly, but with quiet strength. The crowd broke into soft applause. A few people wiped tears. Some kids saluted, not fully understanding why, but feeling something heavy in the air. The doors closed. The blades spun faster, and the helicopter rose. As it lifted into the sky, people kept staring upward, following it until it became a dot, then disappeared into the clouds. For the first time, the town square was silent. But inside the helicopter, Raymond sat across from the officer who had addressed him. The hum of the engine filled the space between them.
Sir,
The officer said gently. "The president's letter will be read at the ceremony. He asked that we deliver this to you first." He handed Raymond a sealed envelope. It had the official crest of the United States. Heavy paper. Neat handwriting. Raymond didn't open it, just placed it carefully inside the inner pocket of his coat, next to the same photo he had carried for decades. "You said you tracked me by satellite," Raymond finally said, his voice low and rough like gravel. "Yes, sir. We saw a flag in an open lot, raised alone. Led to a name we hadn't seen in decades." Raymond gave a tired smile. "I raised that flag for them." "Every single year." "Them, sir?" the officer asked. Raymond didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, his eyes scanning the land below. Trees, roads, rivers, so much had changed. Finally he whispered, "For the men who didn't come back." The officer sat in silence, his throat tightening. He'd read the file. He knew the numbers. 6 men lost in that mission. 1 survived. "And that one man had carried their names, Alan, for more than 50 years, Raymond continued, his voice soft. "They made me promise. If I made it out, I'd tell their families what happened. But when I came home, no one wanted to hear it. They said it was classified, said the mission never happened." He looked down at his hands, old, worn, scarred. "So I stopped talking. I just kept the promise in my own way. The officer nodded slowly. Sir, we found something else. He reached under the seat and pulled out a metal box, dented and aged. The latch had been fixed recently. Placed it in front of Raymond. We recovered this from the site last year. It was buried beneath rubble. We think it belonged to your team. Raymond's fingers hovered over the lid. Slowly he opened it. Inside were 6 dog tags, tarnished, cold, but still legible. Each name burned into his memory. He closed his eyes. His lips moved, barely making sound as he whispered each name. A quiet roll call for brothers long gone. Then he looked at the officer. I'm not going to Arlington for me, he said. The officer understood. No, sir. You're going to bring them home. The chopper banked left, turning toward the capital. The clouds parted ahead, and the skyline began to rise from the horizon. But behind them, back in the town that forgot him, something strange had happened. People stood frozen in the square, and one by one, they began walking toward the park bench where he used to sit. And there on the bench sat something none of them remembered leaving, its cane perfectly balanced, standing upright, as if waiting for his return. And underneath it, folded neatly, was a note in bold handwriting. Do not forget them again. The helicopter raced toward the Capitol, blades cutting through heavy clouds like a knife through paper. Inside, Raymond Ellis sat in silence, the old metal box of dog tags resting on his lap. Each name inside was a weight he had carried for decades. 6 friends, 6 ghosts, and now, finally, someone cared. The officer beside him watched respectfully, saying nothing. He knew that the man sitting in front of him wasn't just a forgotten soldier. He was a secret history, buried by orders, bound by silence. After some time, Raymond finally spoke. We were never supposed to go in. That's what the general said. The officer turned his head. You're talking about Operation Firebreak? Raymond gave a dry laugh. So they finally gave it a name? The officer nodded. Only recently declassified. Even now the files are redacted. But your name was on one of the original mission maps. That's how we found you. Raymond looked out the window, his eyes narrowing like he was staring into memory. We were told it was a recon. Just find the base, mark it, and get out. But when we got there, something was wrong. The air in the chopper seemed to thicken with tension. They were testing weapons. Biological ones. Stuff that didn't belong in this world, he continued. We had 2 options, walk away or stop it. The officer leaned in. You disobeyed orders? Raymond looked him in the eyes. We didn't disobey. We chose what was right. Even if no one ever thanked us. There was a long pause. What happened? The officer asked quietly. Raymond's face hardened. We set charges, timed it. But we were spotted before we could leave. We lost Brady first. Then Mendez. Sanders. He took shrapnel to the chest. Still fought. His voice cracked. Giro dragged him behind a wall. Got shot twice doing it. Hairs covered us. I carried them all to a supply shack while the place burned. He shook his head. When the extraction team came, they only took me. Said the area was too dangerous. That they'd send someone back for the others. He turned his head away. So no one ever came. The officer sat in silence, deeply moved. You buried the truth. No, Raymond replied. I kept it alive. One memory at a time. The helicopter began to descend as the Pentagon came into view, large and solid like a stone monument to forgotten battles. Below, an honor guard was already forming. Flags were being raised. News reporters were gathering behind fences, not knowing exactly who they were waiting for, only that someone important had returned. As the chopper touched down, Raymond looked at the officer. You're not doing this for politics, are you? The officer shook his head. No, sir. We're doing this because we should have done it 50 years ago. Raymond gave a single nod. Outside, the ramp lowered. He stepped out slowly, dog tags in hand, wind rushing around him. The honor guard snapped to attention. He walked forward alone, flanked by silence and sunlight. Somewhere in the crowd, a young soldier whispered, Who is that? A general answered beside him, He's the man who saved lives when orders told him to walk away. The president wasn't there yet, but his words were waiting. A podium had been set up, and a military historian began reading. Today we honor Staff Sergeant Raymond Ellis, the last survivor of a mission never meant to exist. For decades, his silence protected the truth. For decades, his pain carried names that the nation forgot. But today, we remember. Today we speak their names. The historian read each of the 6 soldiers' names, slow and clear. After each name, a bell rang. With each sound, Raymond closed his eyes. For the first time, the weight began to lift. But this was not the end. Because back in his hometown, a teacher had heard what happened. She brought her students to the park bench where he used to sit. The cane still stood. The note still rested there. She read it aloud. "Do not forget them again." And one student raised their hand. "Miss, can we make a memorial?" She smiled. "We're not just going to make one. We're going to make sure no one ever forgets what he did." Back in the small town where Sergeant Raymond Ellis had been mocked for years, the park bench was no longer just wood and metal. It had become a place of quiet reflection, a symbol of the truth they had all ignored. The cane still stood. The note still remained, and now flowers surrounded it. The kids from the local school came with their teachers. Some brought small American flags. Others left hand-drawn pictures of soldiers, sunsets, or eagles. The bench was no longer empty. It was full of memory. The mayor of the town, a man who once walked past Raymond without a second glance, now stood in front of the growing crowd. A microphone was set up, reporters present, parents watching. "I'll be honest," the mayor said, clearing his throat. "We failed him. And worse, we failed the ones he never forgot." He looked down, then back up at the crowd. "We laughed at his coat. We joked about his cane. We made fun of his silence. But that silence hid stories none of us were strong enough to carry." He motioned toward the school children. "From this day forward, this town will honor Staff Sergeant Raymond Ellis and the 6 soldiers he fought to protect. Every year, on this date, we will tell their story. Not just in this park, but in our schools, in our homes, and in our hearts." People clapped, not because they were told to, but because they needed to. The guilt had become heavy. They had looked a hero in the face and turned away. Now they were finally facing the truth. Across the country, the story spread like wildfire. Forgotten hero identified after 50 years, mocked veteran revealed as war legend, president honors soldier who lived in silence. News stations replayed footage of the helicopter landing, of soldiers saluting, of Raymond standing strong with the dog tags in hand. But what caught the nation's attention most was a simple photo, a still shot of the park bench. A cane, a folded note, "Do not forget them again." It went viral. Millions saw it. Thousands commented. Some admitted they had passed by veterans just like Raymond. Some confessed to judging people by their appearance. Some simply cried. But in a quiet hospital room near Washington, D.C., Raymond Ellis wasn't watching the news. He lay in a bed, hands still clutching the metal box. The dog tags had not left his side. Doctors said the journey had taken a toll. His heart was failing. His body, already worn from war and years of living in the cold, was now fading. But his eyes were open, calm, clear. The officer who had escorted him sat by his side. "We've arranged the burial," he said softly. "All 7 of you, together. Arlington has made room." Raymond gave a weak smile. "All these years I thought no one would care. We care, sir. The whole country cares." Raymond looked down at the photograph he kept in his coat. 7 young men, arms around each other, grinning through dirt and sweat. "Brothers, they were better than me," he whispered. "They were the real heroes." The officer placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "They thought you were." There was a pause. Then Raymond's hand tightened around the photo. "Promise me," he said, his voice faint. "Tell them everything, not just what we did, why we did it. Tell them we didn't do it for medals. We did it for each other. Promise." Raymond's eyes drifted to the window. Outside the sun was setting. The light hit just right. Golden, soft, almost like a salute from the sky. And then his breathing slowed. One breath, then another, then stillness. No alarms, no panic, just peace. A nurse stepped in and placed a hand over her heart. "He's gone." The officer stood, saluted, but back in the town. Something was happening. That very moment, the cane fell over. No one touched it. No wind blew. It simply tipped and landed gently on the bench. And a boy who stood nearby gasped, "Did you see that?" Others nodded, eyes wide. It was as if the cane knew. The sergeant had gone home. The sun had set over the hospital where Sergeant Raymond Ellis had passed, and the world felt a little quieter. But in the hours that followed, something unexpected happened. A team of military archivists, historians, and Pentagon officials gathered in a private room. On the table in front of them sat the metal box that Raymond had carried, the one containing the 6 dog tags of his fallen team. But beneath those tags was more. Carefully, they lifted the metal plate that separated the tags from the bottom of the box. Underneath, they found a stack of small folded letters, yellowed with age, each one labeled with a name: Brady, Mendez, Sanders, Giroux, Harris, Cole. 6 letters, 6 final messages. Each one was written in Raymond's handwriting. The officer who had stayed with him at the hospital, now wearing full-dress uniform, picked up the first letter. He unfolded it with care. "To Corporal Brady's family," it read. "He was on T just the best marksman I ever knew. He was the only one who could make us laugh when we hadn't tea eaten in days. He gave his rations to a child he didn't even know. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a light in the dark." The officer's voice broke. He opened another for Mendez's parents. "He died with honor, protecting the only radio we had. He knew he wouldn't make it, but he held the line anyway." He whispered his mother's name in his final breath. "Please know he was brave. He was kind. And he was loved." And another for Harris. "He told me to keep the promise, to make sure no one forgot what we did, even if it meant living in silence. So I did." The room was silent. The general took a deep breath. He didn't just carry their dog tags. He carried their souls. Then came the final envelope. It wasn't addressed to a family. It was addressed to the American people. The general handed it to the officer. "Read it." The officer stood, opened the envelope, and began. "I don't need statues. I don't want medals. All I ever asked was that you remember them. The 6 who never made it home. The 6 who gave everything and never asked for anything in return. You've seen the news stories, heard the praise. But none of that matters if we forget their faces, their names, their hearts. So if you're reading this, promise me one thing. Teach your children that heroes Dante always wear shiny uniforms or live in big houses. Sometimes they sit alone on a bench in silence, carrying the weight of the world with no one to talk to. Remember us, not for what we wore, but for why we served." The letter ended with his signature: Staff Sergeant Raymond Ellis, 3rd Recon Unit. Operation Firebreak 1 of 7. Always 1 of 7. The officer gently folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. There was nothing more to say. Back in Raymond's hometown, something incredible was taking shape. Where the abandoned lot used to be, workers had cleared the space. Local veterans had volunteered to build something there, a permanent memorial. The park bench, his cane, and the note would be preserved in glass right in the center. A new sign had been placed out front, Ellis Square, in honor of the forgotten who served. And under that, 1 of 7. Never alone. School children were writing essays about the 7 soldiers. Teachers told the story every year. The mayor ordered every flag in the town to fly half-staff each July 13th, the day the helicopter came. But what no one expected was what arrived next. A sealed envelope, mailed from Washington, D.C., addressed to the mayor. Inside was a medal, one that Raymond had refused to accept in life. It's the Medal of Honor, and a letter from the White House. He didn't want it, but he earned it. We can't let the world forget that. The mayor placed the medal on display in the town hall, just below a picture of Raymond saluting beside the helicopter. But that night, as the town slept, someone placed something new at the base of the park bench. A folded flag and a photo. The photo showed all 7 soldiers, young and smiling. But behind them, standing in the distance, was a figure no one remembered seeing before. Raymond, watching over them, even then. Weeks passed since Sergeant Raymond Ellis had been laid to rest at Arlington. Side by side with the 6 men he never stopped honoring. But the waves of his story were only beginning to rise. Across the country, news networks aired tributes. Online channels shared his letters. Military academies taught his mission as part of their leadership courses. For once, a hero's story wasn't swallowed by history. It was awakening something. A retired general appeared on national television and said, "We lost track of Raymond Ellis, but he never lost track of us." That's the kind of patriot this country was built on. Veterans came forward from all over the nation, sharing similar stories. Men and women who had served silently, unrecognized, who now felt seen because of him. In cities large and small, local governments passed motions to establish Silent Valor Day, a day to honor not just those in uniform, but those who came home carrying memories they couldn't speak of. But the biggest surprise came when a young college student, Emma Lou, created a short documentary titled "The Man on the Bench: One Soldier's Promise." It started with the image of Raymond's cane and note. Then it told the full story. The footage of the helicopter, the photo of the 7 men, the letter addressed to the American people, and finally, the quiet sound of a bell ringing 7 times. The documentary went viral in 3 days. 22 million views. News anchors cried on camera. Teachers paused classes to show it, military recruiters said. Enlistment inquiries doubled. But what Emma didn't expect was the call she received from the Department of Defense. They wanted her to present the documentary at a national memorial service, the first ever national remembrance for unrecognized heroes of classified missions. She accepted. The event took place in Washington, D.C., on the lawn outside the Lincoln Memorial. Rows upon rows of seats filled with people, veterans, Gold Star families, students, generals, teachers, and citizens from every walk of life. In the front row sat the officer who had flown with Raymond to Arlington. In his lap, he still carried the metal box, now polished, sealed, and engraved with the words, "One of 7. Never alone." As Emma stepped onto the stage, her voice shook with emotion. "I never met Sergeant Ellis, but in many ways, he knew all of us. He saw how the world moves on. He saw how it forgets the quiet ones, and still believed we were worth protecting." She paused. "He once wrote, 'Remember us. It's not for what we wore, but for why we served.' I think we owe it to him, and all those like him, to keep asking ourselves that question. Why do they serve? And what kind of country are we if we stop remembering them?" The crowd stood in silence. Then a choir of schoolchildren sang taps, their voices echoing across the city. One by one, families of fallen soldiers stood and held up photos of their loved ones, many from forgotten or classified operations, never honored publicly until now. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't loud, but it was honest. Back in Raymond's town, the memorial was nearly complete. Carved from white stone and polished black marble, it featured a full sculpture of Raymond sitting on the bench, cane in one hand, photo in the other, his face worn but proud. A granite wall behind him listed 7 names, his at the bottom. Children came daily to leave letters, coins, drawings. But then came a letter no one expected. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. The park supervisor opened it carefully. Inside was a black and white photo, an old army base, charred and broken. On the back, in careful handwriting, were just 6 words. "There are more out there, waiting. No name, no clue." But it was signed. A brother in silence. The town officials stared at each other. What did it mean? Were there other forgotten heroes? Were there others like Raymond, still out there, still sitting in silence? And if so, would the world remember them too? The sky over Arlington was clear the day the final tribute began. There were no speeches, no cameras, no long lists of titles or medals. Just a quiet gathering of 7 families, 6 who had waited decades for recognition, and 1 who never knew their hero had been living just a few miles away in silence. The Army had coordinated it all. A new section of the cemetery had been prepared right next to Raymond's resting place. Small white headstones were installed, each engraved with a name and the words, "One of 7. Operation Firebreak." As the sun began to rise, a military unit marched in perfect formation. Each soldier carried a folded flag. One by one, the flags were placed at each grave. No orders were shouted, no words were spoken. Only the slow, heavy rhythm of boots on stone and the quiet flapping of flags in the breeze. The officer who had once saluted Raymond in the park now stood at attention in front of the final grave, the one that bore Raymond's name. He didn't salute this time. Instead, he knelt, placed a small item on the stone. It was Raymond's cane, the one that once stood beside his bench, resting where he did. Back in Raymond's hometown, the unveiling of Ellis Square had finally come. The whole town gathered. Veterans from nearby cities arrived in their dress uniforms. Firefighters and police officers stood along the edges. Children held flags and wore shirts with Raymond's photo printed on the front. The memorial stood tall in the center of the park, carved from white granite and polished until it gleamed in the sunlight. At the base of the sculpture were 7 bronze dog tags, each one holding a name, but there was no podium, no microphone. Instead, the mayor simply stepped forward, removed his cap, and whispered, "Let them speak in silence." The crowd followed.
One by one, heads bowed.
The loud world, for once, had gone still. It was the kind of quiet Raymond had lived in for years. The kind where dignity didn't need a spotlight. Then something unexpected happened. A man in a dark coat stepped forward, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. No one recognized him. He was older, thin, his left leg stiff. He walked with the help of a cane, not Raymond's cane, his own. He approached the statue, reached into his jacket, and placed an envelope at the foot of the memorial. Then he turned, looked at the crowd, and gave a single, sharp salute. People gasped. Some whispered, "Is that?" But he was already walking away. The envelope was marked, "For the town that forgot and then remembered." Inside was a letter, typed on old paper. Signed, CPL James Arbeck, Operation Firebreak Survivor, MIA, 1971. The town froze. "Another soldier from the mission? Everyone thought only Raymond survived," the letter read. "I was captured in the second wave, taken across the border. Years in a hole, no name, no face, no freedom. When I escaped, I didn't come home. I didn't think there was a home left, but I saw the broadcast. I saw what you did for him, for all of them. For the first time in 50 years, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 20. Belonging. So thank you for making a place in this world where we're not forgotten. He was always the best of us. I lived because of him." The mayor read the letter out loud, voice cracking with emotion. The crowd stood frozen. Then one person began clapping, slowly, then another, and another, but it wasn't wild or loud. It was soft, steady, respectful. Later that night, long after the crowd had gone, a janitor cleaning the square noticed something at the foot of the statue. The cane was glowing slightly in the moonlight. Not from light, but from the smooth polish left by dozens of small fingerprints. Children had touched it that day. Touched the statue, touched the names, not to mock, but to learn. To feel. To remember. Because now, thanks to Raymond, they understood something grown-ups had forgotten. You don't need a voice to be heard. You don't need a stage to be seen. You don't need medals to be a hero. Years passed, seasons changed, but the story of Sergeant Raymond Ellis never faded. Every July 13th, the small town that once mocked him turned into a place of remembrance. People came from other cities just to sit on the same bench where he once rested. Veterans brought medals and laid them beside the sculpture, whispering, "This one's for you, brother." And children, the same ones who once stared or giggled, now came with notebooks in hand. Sketching his statue, copying his words from the plaque at the base, he asked for no glory. He asked for no praise. He only asked that we remember. But it wasn't just a town tradition anymore. Something bigger had begun. At schools across America, teachers showed a short film every Veterans Day. The Man on the Bench had been added to national curriculum. For the first time, students weren't just learning names from history books. They were learning stories of real people, silent sacrifices, and quiet courage. In a classroom in New York City, a boy raised his hand. "Miss, did Sergeant Ellis ever get to say goodbye to his family?" The teacher paused. "We don't know." And then the boy said something that made the entire room silent. "Well, if I was his son, I'd be proud." At Arlington, a new garden bloomed beside Raymond's grave. Veterans and visitors left small stones, coins, and folded notes. One read, "I came home in 2005, but I never felt home until I heard your story." Another, "You reminded me why I put the uniform on." And then one written in a child's scrawl, "I want to be brave like you." Even the military changed. A new program was formed by Congress, named the Ellis Initiative. Its mission was simple: find the forgotten. Veterans who had fallen through the cracks. Heroes who never got their medals. Stories that were buried by time, silence, or shame. And they found them. Men in shelters. Women in small towns. Some still wearing old uniforms, still carrying invisible scars. Raymond's story became their voice. Back in his hometown, a museum was built near the square, small but full of heart. It held Raymond's coat, carefully restored, and his cap placed under glass. On one wall, 7 black and white portraits of his team. On another, letters from people across the world who had been moved by his story. But the most visited part was a quiet corner in the back, a wooden bench. The original one. Faded, worn, untouched. A single sign hung above it. He sat here, and he watched, and he never gave up. One winter evening, snow began to fall gently over Ellis Square. The statue was dusted and white, but the warmth it gave never faded. A small boy and his father stood nearby, bundled in coats. "Why is he holding a photo?" the boy asked. The father knelt beside him, because those were his friends, the ones he never forgot. Were they real? They were real and brave. Just like him. The boy looked up at the sculpture, then down at the 7 names. "Maybe I'll be brave like them someday." The father smiled. "You already are," he remembered. And far away, in a nursing home in Texas, an old man sat beside a window. His name was CPL, James R. Beck, the one who had once mailed the letter to the town. He watched the snow fall and held a photograph of 7 young soldiers. "I kept the promise, Ray," he whispered. Then he saluted the window as if someone were standing there in the light, because some heroes fight with weapons, some fight with courage. But the greatest fight of all is to be forgotten and still choose to remember others. That was Raymond Ellis, and because of him, we will not forget again.